They survived the hell of Normandy. They stormed the bunkers of the Siegfried Line. They were the heroes of America. But what General George Patton saw on the streets of occupied Munich in May 1945 brought him to a fury that not even the Nazis had provoked. His elite soldiers were trading the honor won with blood for cheap pleasures. They were swapping army rations for special favors from German women. This was not love. It was a dirty bazaar where tinned meat was the currency for buying dignity. Patton realized that an army that trades its morality ceases to be an army. He began preparing a counterstrike against this internal decay, a side of the occupation that traditional history rarely discusses. What the general did to his own men behind the closed doors of the military tribunal would challenge everything the world knew about his leadership. Was it a necessary discipline or a step too far? If you appreciate these deep dives into the untold chapters of the war, join us for more. The reality of what followed was a truth few were prepared to face. The landscape of post-war Germany in May 1945 was not a place of immediate peace. It was a sprawling, chaotic vacuum where the laws of civilization had completely evaporated. While the American Third Army remained an unmatched titan on the battlefield, the moment the heavy guns fell silent, a new and far more insidious enemy began to infiltrate the ranks. This was a psychological and moral erosion that targeted the very core of military discipline. The German civilian population was trapped in a state of absolute primitive survival. Cities like Munich and Frankfurt were reduced to mountains of ash and jagged brick, and within those ruins, millions of people were starving. For the local women, survival required a level of desperation that most people today cannot even comprehend. In this broken world, the American soldier was not just a conqueror. He was a god of resources. He held the keys to life itself in the form of army rations, chocolate bars, and cigarettes. These simple items, which were taken for granted in the United States, became the most powerful currency on the European continent. General George Patton, a man who viewed the soldier's uniform as a sacred shroud of honor, recognized this strategic threat with terrifying clarity. He saw that the exchange of food for special favors was not a series of isolated incidents, but a systemic rot that threatened to turn his elite warriors into a disorganized mob of predators and black marketeers. Patton believed that discipline was the only barrier between an army and a gang of armed looters. He was famous for his obsession with the smallest details of military appearance and conduct, because he knew that a soldier who begins to compromise his morals in the bedroom will inevitably compromise his courage on the battlefield. He once stated to his officers, and I quote, "All through your army careers, you men have bitched about what you call chicken shit drill and discipline. That is for one purpose only: to ensure instant obedience to orders and to create constant alertness." To Patton, the non-fraternization policy was not a suggestion or a temporary guideline from the high command. It was a non-negotiable tactical requirement for the security of the American occupation. He understood that every intimate connection between a soldier and a civilian was a potential breach in security. He feared that remnants of the Nazi underground, specifically the werewolf guerrilla units, were watching these interactions, waiting for a moment to exploit a soldier's weakness for intelligence or sabotage. Yet, despite his frequent and violent warnings, the exchange of honor for rations continued to expand across the American zone. Military police reports began to overwhelm his staff, detailing a disturbing and widespread pattern of non-compliance. These reports contained evidence of senior staff officers using government-issued fuel and vehicles to facilitate secret rendezvous, and entire supply depots being systematically drained of high-value goods to fund the forbidden private lives of soldiers. Patton felt the reins of command slipping from his hands. This blatant, cold-blooded defiance of his orders was what he privately described as an act of calculated treason against the United States Army. To a man like George Patton, this behavioral decay was a direct personal insult to everything he had achieved as a commander. He was witnessing the elite force he had molded through blood and iron, the pride of the American military establishment, soften and degrade before his eyes. We must consider the agonizing moral dilemma of that specific moment in history. You have survived years of the most brutal, soul-crushing combat imaginable. You have watched your closest friends die in the freezing mud of the Ardennes. And now, you find yourself surrounded by a population that has nothing left but their own desperation and hunger. If you were standing among those jagged ruins, exhausted and lonely, could you have truly resisted the temptation when the only cost of a human connection was a single, insignificant can of army beef? It is a question that challenges the very foundations of human nature and military duty. However, Patton's response was not filtered through the lens of empathy or humanitarian concern. It was rapid, systematic, and completely ruthless. He did not operate on emotion. He operated with a cold, professional lethality that was deeply disturbing even to his own staff. He was a man who famously stated, "I don't want to get any messages saying that we are holding our position. We are advancing constantly, and we are not interested in holding on to anything except the enemy." He decided to advance against this internal moral rot with the exact same unstoppable intensity he had used against the German armored divisions. Patton personally led a series of unannounced, high-stakes inspections of frontline hospitals, rear-area logistics units, and supply depots, where intelligence suggested that corruption had taken root. He wanted his men to feel his shadow behind them at all times. His eyes, which many subordinates described as having a frozen, predatory focus, swept over the long ranks of his soldiers, searching for even the smallest sign of guilt or hesitation. During one legendary inspection in the outskirts of Munich, he uncovered a sophisticated black market operation running directly out of a regimental command post. He did not see heroes in that room who had liberated concentration camps or crossed the Rhine under fire. He saw a strategic vulnerability that needed to be surgically erased. He understood a fundamental truth of military leadership. The soldier who chooses to break a minor order today will eventually break a life or death order tomorrow when the pressure is highest. For Patton, there was no such thing as an insignificant infraction. If this deep dive into the harsh reality of military command resonates with you, joining our community and liking the video helps us continue uncovering these difficult truths that the history books often overlook. The general's verdict was swift, brutal, and meticulously designed to send a psychological shockwave through the entire occupation force. He did not believe in standard warnings or minor administrative reprimands. Instead, he engineered a complete and systemic demolition of the offenders' lives, focusing specifically on those in positions of leadership who had failed their men. One well-documented case involved a captain, a highly decorated officer who had earned the Silver Star for gallantry in action during the drive into the heart of Germany. Patton had this officer stripped of his rank, his hard-earned medals, and his personal dignity in a public display of cold military justice. To Patton, character was the only true measure of a man's worth, and this officer had failed that test completely. He once said, quote, "The object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other guy die for his." But in this instance, he made his own officer suffer a living death of professional and social shame. This captain was sentenced to hard manual labor, forced to perform the most repulsive and degrading tasks side by side with the very Nazi SS guards he had personally captured just weeks before. This was a calculated psychological blow intended to show that a soldier without honor was no better than the enemy he had defeated. Patton then gathered the entire regiment to witness the finality of this judgment. He did not address them as fellow Americans or as victors of the Great War. He addressed them as a disgrace to the uniform of the United States. If you want to trade your honor for meat, you will eat the dirt alongside those you defeated. This was not just a legal sentence. It was a cold, absolute assertion of command control. Patton immediately ordered his highest-ranking officers to personally lead night patrols through the black market hotspots of the city. The presence of the military police was tripled across every sector of the occupation zone. This was not a gradual change in behavior. The forbidden trade in rations and favors was effectively erased within 72 hours through a campaign of sheer, systemic terror. The men's fear of General Patton's unpredictable wrath. For Patton, this was the only viable way to restore the warrior spirit and ensure that his army remained a sharp, disciplined weapon. It was justice delivered with the cold edge of a sword, meant to ensure that the Third Army would never again be compromised from within. Why has this specific chapter of the post-war occupation been left in the dark shadows for over 80 years? The answer is as simple as it is disturbing. It fundamentally shattered the carefully constructed narrative of the Allied victory. It exposed a side of the greatest generation that the military establishment was not prepared to confront. A side where even the most celebrated heroes were susceptible to moral decay under the pressure of peace. General George Patton understood the high stakes of history better than anyone. He famously stated, "God have mercy upon my enemies, because I won't." And he showed absolutely no mercy to those who weakened the integrity of his army from within. The military leadership preferred to focus on grand maneuvers and the liberation of continents. But Patton focused on the individual character of the man in the foxhole. He understood a truth few dared to speak. The war did not truly end when the shooting stopped. It simply transformed into a different kind of struggle. Was this systematic suppression of facts justified to protect the legacy of victory? Or was it a missed opportunity to learn from a difficult past? In the grand scheme of history, was this incident a vital lesson in leadership, or merely a byproduct of exhaustion in a world reduced to smoking ruins? This question continues to divide historians even to this day. Some view Patton as a visionary hero who saved the soul of the American army, while others see him as a cold tyrant who crushed the humanity of his men. Thank you for taking this journey into these uncomfortable truths with us. This is War POV with Mike. We bring you the history that others prefer to leave unsaid. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe that Patton's extreme methods were a necessity, or did he finally go too far? Your input is what drives this channel forward. Remember, confronting a difficult history is our greatest strategic resource.
Appreciate you staying till the end. This was Mike, and I'll see you in the next story.